I left my fiancée at the altar on our wedding day, but what I discovered about her 3 years later would change everything I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the choices we make when we think we're protecting the people we care about most. Well, hello there, folks. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Frank Thompson, and boy oh boy, do I have a story for you today. Before we get started, I've got to tell you something that just breaks this old heart of mine. We've got nearly 500,000 people watching these videos, but only 4% of you are actually subscribed. That means 96% of you beautiful souls are watching, but haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Now, I'm not mad, well, it makes me a little sad, to be honest. If these stories touch your heart the way they touch mine, would you mind doing an old man a favor and hitting that subscribe button? And if today's story moves you, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you think. Your comments mean the world to me. Now settle in, because today I'm going to tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made, and how sometimes the worst decisions of our lives can lead us to understand what love really means. This happened back in 1987, when I was 28 years old, living in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and thought I had my whole life figured out. Her name was Margaret Rose Sullivan, but everyone called her Maggie. Lord, she was something else. Red hair that caught fire in the sunlight, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. I met her at the Cedar Rapids Public Library, where she worked as a children's librarian. I'd gone in there looking for a book on engine repair for my motorcycle, got lost in the stacks, and ended up in the children's section where she was reading Where the Wild Things Are, to a group of kids sitting cross-legged on a colorful rug. I stood there in the doorway, this grown man in grease-stained overalls, completely mesmerized by the way she brought those characters to life. She did all the voices, made wild gestures with her hands, and had those kids hanging on every word. When she finished the story and looked up, our eyes met across that room, and I swear to you, it was like lightning struck me right there between the encyclopedias and the picture books. After the kids scattered, I walked up to her, probably looking like a complete fool, and asked if she could help me find a book. She smiled and said, "Let me guess, you're looking for something in automotive repair." I was stunned. How did she know? She laughed at my expression and pointed to my hands. Grease under the fingernails is a dead giveaway. That was Maggie for you. Always noticing details, always one step ahead, always making you feel like you were exactly where you belonged. We ended up talking for 2 hours that day. I learned that she'd grown up in Dubuque, came to Cedar Rapids for college, and stayed because she fell in love with the community. She told me about her dream of opening a bookstore cafe someday, a place where people could drink coffee and lose themselves in stories. I told her about my motorcycle repair shop, how I'd inherited it from my father, and how working with my hands was the only thing that ever made sense to me. By the time she had to close the library, I knew I was in trouble. The good kind of trouble, the kind that makes your heart race and your palms sweat and makes you believe in things like fate and destiny. I asked her out to dinner that night, and she said yes. We went to a little Italian place called Mama Rossetti's on First Avenue. The food was terrible, but we were so busy talking and laughing that neither of us cared. She told me about the books that changed her life, and I told her about the first motorcycle I ever fixed, a 1972 Honda CB350 that belonged to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. We closed down the restaurant, then walked around downtown Cedar Rapids until 2 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing. From that night on, We were inseparable. Maggie would come by the shop during her lunch breaks, perching on the counter while I worked, reading me passages from whatever book she was currently obsessed with. I'd pick her up from the library every evening, and we'd drive out to the countryside on my Harley, her arms wrapped tight around my waist, her laughter carried away by the wind. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel magical. We'd grocery shop together at the local Hy-Vee, and somehow she'd turn it into an adventure, making up stories about the other customers, doing impressions of the checkout clerks, until I was laughing so hard I could barely push the cart. We'd watch old movies at her apartment, a tiny place above the bakery on 2nd Street that always smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon, and she'd provide commentary that was often funnier than the actual film. But what I loved most about Maggie was how she saw people, really saw them. She had this gift for making everyone feel important, valued, heard. The shy kid who came to story time became brave under her encouragement. The elderly man who came to the library just to have someone to talk to left feeling like he'd made a real friend. She collected people the way others collect stamps or coins, treasuring each relationship, remembering details about their lives that they'd mentioned months earlier. 6 months after we met, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. The problem was, I was scared out of my mind. I'd never felt anything like what I felt for Maggie. It was overwhelming, all-consuming, terrifying in its intensity. I'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, just watching her sleep, and the love I felt for her was so strong, it physically hurt. I started carrying my grandmother's engagement ring around in my pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had been in our family for 3 generations. I must have planned to propose a dozen different times, but every time I got close, I'd chicken out. What if she said no? What if I wasn't good enough for her? What if I screwed it up somehow? Finally, on a warm evening in September, we were sitting by the Cedar River, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maggie was leaning against me, reading poetry from a worn book of Langston Hughes, and I realized I couldn't wait another day to make her officially mine. I got down on one knee right there on the riverbank, pulled out that ring, and asked Margaret Rose Sullivan to marry me. She started crying before I even finished the question, said yes through her tears, and kissed me with such passion that I nearly fell over backward into the water. We set the wedding date for June 15th, 1987, at St. Joseph's Catholic Church on the east side of town. Maggie threw herself into wedding planning with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. She spent hours poring over bridal magazines, dragging me to cake tastings and florist appointments, turning our engagement into a celebration that seemed to involve half of Cedar Rapids. Her parents, Robert and Helen Sullivan, flew in from Dubuque and immediately made me feel like part of the family. Her father was a retired high school principal, her mother a former nurse, and they were salt-of-the-earth people who raised their daughter with love, values, and an unshakable belief that family was the most important thing in the world. My own parents had died in a car accident when I was 22, so having the Sullivans embrace me meant everything. Robert would come by the shop sometimes, rolling up his sleeves to help me with whatever project I was working on, sharing stories about his teaching days and asking for my advice on his own vintage Mustang. Helen would bring us homemade cookies and would sit for hours listening to Maggie excitedly describe the latest wedding preparations. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, maybe. Because sometimes when things are going too well, you start waiting for the other shoe to drop. And drop it did, though not at all in the way I expected. 3 weeks before our wedding, I was working late at the shop, trying to finish a restoration job on a 1965 Triumph Bonneville. It was nearly midnight when I heard a knock on the door. I figured it was Maggie, maybe bringing me coffee and trying to convince me to come home and get some sleep. But when I opened the door, I found a woman I'd never seen before. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed in a navy blue suit, with graying blonde hair and tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Morrison from the University of Iowa. Hospitals and clinics. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I need to speak with you about Margaret Sullivan. May I come in?" My blood turned to ice water. Had something happened to Maggie? Was she hurt? Sick? I let Dr. Morrison into the shop, my hands shaking as I poured coffee from the pot I kept going during long work nights. "Is Maggie okay?" I asked. "Has something happened to her?" "Doctor." Morrison sat down on an old folding chair, clasped her hands in her lap, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, and I need you to understand that I'm violating several ethical guidelines by being here. But Margaret has been my patient for over 2 years, and I've watched her struggle with a decision that's tearing her apart." "What kind of decision? What are you talking about?" "Margaret has a condition called Huntington's disease. Are you familiar with it?" I wasn't, but the way Dr. Morrison said it made my stomach drop to the floor. "No. What is it?" "It's a hereditary neurodegenerative disorder. It affects movement, cognitive ability, and emotional control. The symptoms typically begin appearing in middle age, and it's always fatal. Margaret tested positive for the gene mutation 2 years ago." The shop suddenly felt like it was spinning around me. I gripped the edge of my workbench to steady myself. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means that sometime in her 30s or 40s, Margaret will begin to develop symptoms: loss of coordination, involuntary movements, difficulty thinking clearly, personality changes. The progression varies from person to person, but the outcome is always the same. She'll need full-time care, and eventually— I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. Eventually, she'll die from complications of the disease." I stared at Dr. Morrison, trying to process what she was telling me. "Why are you here? Why isn't Maggie telling me this?" "Because she's planning to call off your wedding. She's planning to disappear from your life, to spare you from having to watch her deteriorate. She thinks she's protecting you by leaving you free to find someone else, someone who can give you the future she believes she can't." The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. "She doesn't get to make that decision for me. She doesn't get to decide what I can or can't handle." "That's exactly what I told her," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "But Margaret is convinced that marrying you would be selfish. She says she won't saddle you with a wife who's going to become a burden." "A burden?" I was shouting now, pacing around the shop like a caged animal. "She thinks she'd be a burden. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." "I believe you, Mr. Thompson. That's why I'm here. Margaret made me promise not to tell you about her condition, but I can't stand by and watch two people who obviously love each other throw away their chance at happiness because of fear." I sat down hard on a tool crate, put my head in my hands, and tried to think. The woman I loved was dying, had known she was dying for 2 years, and hadn't told me. Worse, she was planning to leave me to protect me from a future I might not even want to be protected from. "How long does she have?" I asked. "Before symptoms appear." It could be anywhere from 5 to 20 years. And even after symptoms begin, people can live with Huntington's for many years with proper care and support. So we could have decades together. You could, or you could have 5 years. There's no way to know. I looked up at Dr. Morrison, this woman who had risked her career to give me information that might save my relationship. What would you do? If you were in my position, what would you do? She smiled sadly. I'd love her every day I had her, Mr. Thompson. I'd love her through whatever came. That's what marriage vows mean, isn't it? In sickness and in health. After Dr. Morrison left, I sat in that shop until dawn, wrestling with emotions I didn't know how to name. I was angry at Maggie for lying to me, for making decisions about our future without including me. I was terrified of losing her, of watching the vibrant, brilliant woman I loved slowly fade away. But underneath all of that was a love so fierce and protective that it surprised me with its intensity. I thought about all the moments we'd shared, all the times she'd made me laugh, all the ways she'd made my life better just by being in it. I thought about the future we'd planned together, the bookstore cafe she wanted to open, the children we'd talked about having, the trips we wanted to take. Was I supposed to throw all of that away because someday, maybe decades from now, things might get difficult? By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision. I was going to marry Margaret Rose Sullivan, Huntington's disease be damned. We'd face whatever came together, just like we'd promised to do. But when I went to find her that morning, she was gone. I drove to her apartment, but the bakery owner told me she'd moved out during the night. I went to the library, but her supervisor said she'd resigned, effective immediately. I called her parents in Dubuque, but they claimed they didn't know where she was. I could hear the pain in Helen Sullivan's voice when she told me that Maggie had asked them to tell me she was sorry, but the wedding was off. For 3 days, I searched for her, like a man possessed. I called every hotel and motel within 100-mile radius. I drove to every place we'd ever been together, hoping to find her sitting by the river or walking through the park where we'd had our first picnic. I even hired a private investigator, a guy named Dave Kowalski, who worked out of a dingy office above a pawn shop downtown. But Maggie had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. The only trace of her was the engagement ring she'd left on the kitchen counter of her apartment, along with a letter that simply said, "Please don't look for me. This is better for both of us. I will always love you." The wedding was supposed to happen in 18 days. I had to call the church, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. I had to return gifts and cancel the honeymoon reservations. I had to look people in the eye and tell them that the woman I loved had left me without explanation. Most people assumed she'd gotten cold feet, that she decided she wasn't ready for marriage. A few suggested that maybe I was better off without her if she was the kind of person who would disappear without warning. But I knew the truth. I knew she'd left because she loved me too much to stay. The night before what should have been our wedding day, I got drunk for the first and only time in my life. I sat in my kitchen with a bottle of Jack Daniels, looking at the wedding ring I'd never get to put on her finger, and I made a decision that I would regret for the rest of my life. I decided to let her go. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I convinced myself that maybe she was right. Maybe love meant letting someone make their own choices, even when those choices broke your heart. Maybe the most loving thing I could do was respect her decision and try to build a life without her. So I did. I threw myself into work, expanding my motorcycle shop, taking on bigger restoration projects, building a reputation as one of the best mechanics in eastern Iowa. I dated occasionally, nice women who deserved better than a man who was still in love with someone else. I never married, never had children, never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd fought harder to find her. Years passed. The sharp edge of grief dulled into a constant ache that I learned to live with. I told myself that I'd moved on, that I was content with the life I'd built. But there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think about Maggie, didn't wonder where she was, and if she was happy. Then, in 1990, 3 years after she'd left me, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was Dave Kowalski, the private investigator I'd hired to find her. I'd forgotten I was still paying his retainer. He'd been looking for her all this time, sending me brief reports every few months that basically said he'd found nothing. "Frank," he said, "I found her." My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "Where is she?" "Seattle, Washington. But Frank, there's something you need to know before you decide whether or not to contact her." "What?" "She's married." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard in the chair behind my desk, the phone suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. "Married," I repeated. "To a guy named Michael Chen. He's a doctor at the University of Washington Medical Center. They got married about 2 years ago." 2 years ago, right around the time Maggie and I should have been celebrating our second wedding anniversary. Is she happy?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Frank, that's not all. She's got a daughter." "A daughter?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Born in March of 1988. Her name is Sarah." I did the math quickly in my head. March 1988. That meant Maggie had gotten pregnant in June of 1987, right around the time she disappeared, right around the time we should have been getting married. "Dave," I said, my voice shaking, "is the little girl mine?" There was a long pause. "I don't know, Frank, but the timing, it's possible." I hung up the phone and sat in my office for hours, staring at the wall, trying to process this information. Maggie might have left me because she was pregnant with my child. And instead of telling me, instead of trusting me to do the right thing, she'd run away and married someone else. The anger I felt then was different from anything I'd experienced before. It was clean and pure and righteous. She'd had no right to keep my child from me. She'd had no right to make that decision alone. I booked a flight to Seattle that same day. The address Dave had given me was in a nice suburb called Bellevue, a 2-story house with a well-maintained yard and a white picket fence that looked like something out of a magazine. I sat in my rental car across the street for 2 hours, working up the courage to knock on the door. When I finally did, it was Michael Chen who answered. He was a small, soft-spoken man in his early 30s, with kind eyes and the gentle manner of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news to patients and families. When I introduced myself as an old friend of Maggie's from Iowa, he smiled and invited me in. "Maggie's told me so much about Cedar Rapids," he said, leading me into a living room that was tastefully decorated with books and family photos. "She has such fond memories of her time there. Fond memories, as if our relationship had been some pleasant chapter in her past instead of the defining experience of both our lives." "Is she here?" I asked. "She's at the park with Sarah. They should be back soon. Can I get you some coffee?" I accepted the coffee, though I doubt I could have tasted it if it had been flavored with concrete. I was too busy studying the photos on the mantelpiece, looking for pictures of the daughter who might be mine. There she was, a little girl with red hair and green eyes, Maggie's eyes, laughing as she played on a swing set. Another photo showed her blowing out candles on a birthday cake, her small face bright with joy. In every picture she looked happy, loved, secure. "She's beautiful," I said. "Sarah's the light of our lives," Michael said. "Maggie was a single mother when I met her. Sarah's father wasn't in the picture. But from the moment I met that little girl, I knew I wanted to be her dad. Wasn't in the picture, because he'd never been told he was going to be a father." "How did you and Maggie meet?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "At the hospital. I was doing my residency in neurology, and she'd brought Sarah to the emergency room with a fever. We got to talking in the waiting room, and I was struck by what a devoted mother she was. Sarah had been fussy all day, but Maggie was so patient, so loving. She sang to her, told her stories, made her laugh even though she was feeling terrible." Michael's face lit up as he talked about his wife and daughter. It was clear that he adored them both, and despite my anger and jealousy, I found myself liking this man who had stepped in to be a father to my child. "Maggie had been through a difficult time before we met," Michael continued. "She'd lost someone very important to her, and she was still grieving. But she's one of the strongest people I've ever known. She rebuilt her life from nothing, raised Sarah on her own, and somehow managed to keep her heart open enough to love again. Lost someone very important to her. I wanted to tell him that the someone she'd lost was sitting right there in his living room, that I hadn't been lost, I'd been abandoned. But before I could say anything, I heard the front door open and a child's voice calling out, 'Daddy, we're home.' My heart stopped. Even that one small phrase told me everything I needed to know about the life Maggie had built here. Sarah called Michael Daddy. She didn't even know I existed. 'We're in the living room,' Michael called back. 'We have a visitor.' I heard footsteps, and then Maggie appeared in the doorway, holding the hand of a 3-year-old girl who looked exactly like her mother had at that age. When Maggie saw me, the color drained from her face. She gripped Sarah's hand tighter and took a step backward, as if she was preparing to run again. 'Hello, Maggie,' I said. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Sarah looked back and forth between the adults, sensing the tension, but not understanding it. Michael looked confused, clearly picking up on the undercurrents, but not knowing what was happening. 'Frank,' Maggie finally whispered, 'what are you doing here? I think we need to talk.' Michael stood up, still looking puzzled, but recognizing that this was something private between his wife and me. 'Sarah, why don't you and I go upstairs and play with your dollhouse while Mommy and her friend catch up?' 'Can I show him my dollhouse first?' Sarah asked, looking at me with curious green eyes that were so much like her mother's, it made my chest ache. 'Maybe later, sweetheart,' Maggie said, her voice strained. 'Frank and I need to talk first.' After Michael and Sarah went upstairs, Maggie and I stared at each other across the living room. She looked older, more tired than when I'd known her, but she was still the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She was also still wearing her wedding ring, I noticed. The one Michael had given her, not me. 'How did you find me?' she asked. 'I hired someone. It took 3 years. But he found you.' She sat down on the couch, as far away from me as possible. 'You shouldn't have come here, Frank.' I know about the Huntington's disease, I said. Her face went even paler. How? Dr. Morrison came to see me the night before you left. Maggie closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with tears. She had no right to do that. She had every right. I had every right to know what was happening to the woman I loved. No, Maggie said fiercely. You had no right to watch me die. You had no right to waste your life taking care of someone who's going to become a burden. That's not your decision to make. Yes, it is. It's my life, my disease, my choice. We were both shouting now, 3 years of pain and anger and unfinished business spilling out all at once. I forced myself to lower my voice, remembering that there was a child in the house. Is she mine? I asked. Maggie's expression crumbled. She put her face in her hands and started to cry, the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from the very bottom of your soul. Yes, she whispered. She's yours. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd already known. Hearing it out loud made it real, in a way that changed everything. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why didn't you give me the chance to do the right thing? Because I was scared, she cried. I found out I was pregnant 2 days after I got the results of the genetic test. I was going to die, Frank, and I might pass this disease on to my child. What kind of life was that to offer you? What kind of future? Any future with you would have been better than the last 3 years without you. She looked up at me then, her green eyes swimming with tears. You don't understand. The symptoms could start any time. I could have 5 good years, or I could have 20. There's no way to know. And when it starts, it's going to be ugly, Frank. I'm going to lose my coordination, my ability to think clearly. My personality might change completely. I could become violent or depressed or paranoid. I could live for years in a state where I'm not really me anymore. I won't put you through that. And what about Sarah? What happens to her when you get sick? Michael will take care of her. He's legally adopted her. She'll be safe and loved and provided for. By a stranger. By someone who's not her real father. Michael is her real father in every way that matters. He's the one who was there when she took her first steps, who comforted her when she had nightmares, who teaches her to ride a bike and helps her with her homework. He's the one she calls Daddy, and he's the one who'll be there for her no matter what happens to me. I wanted to argue, to insist that biology mattered, that I had rights as Sarah's father. But looking around that comfortable home, seeing the evidence of the life Maggie had built for herself and our daughter, I realized that my rights didn't matter as much as Sarah's well-being. She's happy here, I said. She is. She has a father who adores her, grandparents who spoil her, friends at preschool, stability, security. Everything I wanted to give her and couldn't. And you? Are you happy? Maggie was quiet for a long time. I'm content, she finally said. Michael is a good man. He loves me, and he loves Sarah. We have a peaceful life together. That's not what I asked. She met my eyes, and for a moment I saw the girl I'd fallen in love with by the Cedar River all those years ago. No, Frank, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy since the day I left you. But happiness isn't the only thing that matters. It should be. No, it shouldn't. Love matters more. And sometimes, love means sacrificing your own happiness for someone else's well-being. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between us. Upstairs, I could hear Sarah's laughter and Michael's patient voice as he played with her. "What do you want from me?" Maggie asked finally. "I don't know," I admitted. "I came here angry, ready to fight for my rights as her father. But seeing her, seeing the life you've built, I don't want to destroy that." "Then what?" "I want to know her, not as her father, not in any way that would disrupt her life or confuse her. But I want to be part of her world, even if it's just as some friend of Mommy's from Iowa." Maggie shook her head. "That's too complicated, Frank. Too risky. What if she figures out who you really are? What if Michael gets suspicious? What if you decide someday that being on the periphery isn't enough? Then what's the alternative? I just go back to Iowa and pretend she doesn't exist." "Yes, that's exactly what you do. You go back to Iowa, you find a nice woman, you get married, you have children of your own. You build a life that doesn't revolve around people you can't have. I tried that. It doesn't work." "Then try harder." I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of the conversation. "I need to think about this. Frank, please, don't make this harder than it already is. Just go home. Let us be." "I'll be in town for 3 days," I said. "I'm staying at the Hyatt downtown. If you change your mind, if you want to talk more, you know where to find me." I left without saying goodbye to Michael or Sarah, without looking back at the house where my daughter was growing up, happy and loved without me. I drove back to the hotel in a daze, called room service for a bottle of whiskey, and spent the night staring out the window at the Seattle skyline, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. The next morning, my phone rang at 8 o'clock. It was Maggie. "There's a park about 10 blocks from our house," she said. "Bellevue Downtown Park. Meet me there at noon. And Frank, come alone." When I got to the park, Maggie was already there, sitting on a bench overlooking a small pond. She was wearing a simple blue dress and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked so much like the young librarian I'd fallen in love with that it took my breath away. "Thank you for coming," I said, sitting down beside her, careful to leave space between us. "I didn't sleep last night," she said. "I kept thinking about what you said, about wanting to know her, and I realized that maybe I've been selfish." "How so?" "Sarah asks about her biological father sometimes. Not often, but occasionally. I always tell her that he was a good man who couldn't be part of our lives. But what if someday she wants to know more? What if she grows up feeling incomplete because she never knew where she came from?" I felt a flicker of hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe you're right. Maybe you deserve the chance to know her, and maybe she deserves the chance to know you, even if it's not in the way either of us originally planned." "What about Michael?" "I haven't told him the truth about Sarah's father. He knows there was someone important in my past, someone I loved and lost, but he doesn't know the details. I think it's time I was honest with him. And if he can't handle it, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Michael is a good man, Frank. He loves Sarah, and he wants what's best for her. If he understands that you're not trying to replace him, that you just want to be part of her life in whatever way is appropriate, I think he'll be okay with it." "And the Huntingtons, when are you going to tell him about that?" Maggie's face fell. "I don't know. Soon, I think. The not knowing is killing me. He started asking questions about why I'm so adamant that we shouldn't have more children. He wants to expand our family, and I keep making excuses. He deserves to know, Maggie. and he deserves to make his own choice about whether or not he can handle it. I know. You're right. I've been a coward about a lot of things. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ducks paddle around the pond, both of us lost in thought. What would this look like? I asked finally. Me being part of Sarah's life? I'm not sure. Maybe you could visit a few times a year. Maybe we could bring her to Iowa sometimes so she could see where I grew up. We'd have to take it slow, see how everyone adjusts. And us, what happens between us? Maggie looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. Nothing happens between us, Frank. I'm married. I made a commitment to Michael, and I intend to honor it. Even though you're not happy. Even though I'm not happy, Michael doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes. Loving me wasn't a mistake. No, but leaving you the way I did was. And not telling you about Sarah was an even bigger mistake. I can't undo those things, but I can try to do better going forward. I wanted to argue, to tell her that it wasn't too late, that we could still be together if we just had the courage to fight for it. But looking at her, seeing the resolve in her expression, I knew that ship had sailed. Maggie had made her choice, and I had to respect it, even if it broke my heart all over again. Okay, I said. Let's try it your way. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her since I'd arrived in Seattle. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on us completely. For still wanting to be part of Sarah's life, even when I made it impossible. She's my daughter, Maggie. I'll always want to be part of her life. That afternoon, Maggie took me back to the house and told Michael the truth. The whole truth. About our relationship. About Sarah's parentage. About the Huntington's disease. I watched this good, decent man process information that turned his world upside down, and I was amazed by his grace under pressure. He asked thoughtful questions, expressed concern for Maggie's health, and welcomed me into his home with a generosity that put me to shame. When Sarah came downstairs for dinner, Michael gently explained that I was a very special friend of Mommy's from before they met, someone who had known her when she lived in Iowa. Sarah looked at me with those bright green eyes and asked, "Did you know my mommy when she was young?" "I did," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "She was just as beautiful and kind as she is now. Did she read you stories like she reads to me?" I glanced at Maggie, who was watching this interaction with tears in her eyes. "She did. Your mommy is the best storyteller I've ever known." That first dinner was awkward and wonderful and heartbreaking all at once. I watched my daughter eat spaghetti, getting sauce all over her face, chattering about her preschool friends and her favorite books. I watched Michael patiently wipe her chin and listen to her rambling stories with the attention of a man who truly treasured every moment with her. I watched Maggie trying to be the perfect hostess while dealing with emotions I could only imagine. After dinner, Sarah asked if I wanted to see her dollhouse, and I spent an hour on the floor of her bedroom, listening to elaborate stories about the tiny plastic family that lived in the pink Victorian house. She introduced me to each doll, explained their relationships and their jobs and their favorite foods. And I was amazed by her imagination, her creativity, her pure joy in simple things. When it was time for her bath and bedtime, she hugged me goodbye and said, "Will you come see me again, Frank? If it's okay with your mom and dad, I'd love to." "It's okay with me," she said seriously. "You seem nice." After she was asleep, the three adults sat in the living room, trying to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. Michael, bless him, took the lead. "I think we need to establish some ground rules," he said. "First, Sarah's well-being comes before anyone else's needs or wants. Second, I'm her father in every legal and practical sense, and that's not going to change. Third, we're all going to be honest with each other, even when it's uncomfortable." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means you can be part of Sarah's life, but as Frank, Mommy's friend from Iowa, not as her biological father. Not yet, anyway. Maybe someday, when she's older and can understand the situation better, we can tell her the truth. But for now, she needs stability more than she needs to know about genetics." It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it was more than I'd had 3 days earlier. I can live with that. And I need to know that you're not going to try to undermine my relationship with her, or make her feel torn between two fathers. Michael, you're the one who's been there for her every day of her life. You're the one she runs to when she's scared, the one who knows her favorite bedtime story, the one who'll teach her to drive and walk her down the aisle someday. I'm not trying to replace you. I just want to know her. Michael nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. Then he turned to his wife. "Maggie, we need to talk about the Huntingtons. We need to see specialists, explore treatment options, make plans for the future." "There is no treatment," Maggie said quietly. "There's no cure. There's just waiting and hoping and trying to live as normally as possible for as long as possible." "Then that's what we'll do. Together. All of us." I stayed in Seattle for the rest of the week, visiting with Sarah every day, slowly becoming a fixture in their lives. I read her stories, pushed her on the swings at the park, helped her build elaborate towers out of blocks. I also spent time with Michael, this remarkable man who was handling an impossible situation with more grace than I could have managed. On my last day, Maggie and I took a walk around the neighborhood while Michael watched Sarah. It was the first time we'd been alone together since that conversation in the park. "Thank you," I said as we walked past neat suburban houses with well-tended gardens. "For what?" "For giving me this chance, for letting me know her. I should have done it 3 years ago. I should have trusted you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. You were scared. You were trying to protect everyone you loved. I can't fault you for that. Can you forgive me?" I stopped walking and looked at her, this woman who had shaped every day of my life for the past 6 years, even when she wasn't in it. "There's nothing to forgive, Maggie. We both made mistakes. We both hurt each other. But look what came out of it. Sarah is the most amazing little girl I've ever met, and she's happy and loved and secure. That's what matters. I still love you, you know," she said quietly. "I never stopped loving you." "I know. I never stopped loving you either. But sometimes love isn't enough to fix everything that's broken. Do you think you'll ever be able to move on, find someone else?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I'm focused on being the best version of Frank, the family friend that I can be. Sarah deserves that. We established a routine over the next few years. I would visit Seattle every few months, sometimes staying for a weekend, sometimes for a whole week. Sarah grew to love my visits, and I became Uncle Frank, the fun guy from Iowa who brought interesting presents and told stories about Mommy's childhood. Michael and I developed an unlikely friendship, bonding over our shared love for Sarah and our determination to support Maggie through whatever was coming. The symptoms started when Sarah was 7 years old. It began with small things that could have been stress or fatigue. Maggie would drop a coffee cup, stumble slightly while walking, forget words in the middle of sentences. But we all knew what it meant. Michael arranged for the best possible care, consulting with specialists across the country, exploring experimental treatments, making sure Maggie had access to every resource available. I flew out whenever they needed me, taking time off from the shop to help with Sarah or to spell Michael when he needed a break. Sarah, beautiful and resilient, adapted to her mother's changing condition with the flexibility that children possess. She learned to help Mommy when her hands shook, to be patient when she repeated herself, to give extra hugs when the disease made her sad or frustrated. Michael and I were careful to maintain as much normalcy as possible, making sure Sarah still had playdates and birthday parties and all the regular joys of childhood. The hardest part was watching Maggie struggle with the loss of her independence, her dignity, her sense of self. There were days when she was completely herself, sharp and funny and wise. There were other days when the disease robbed her of words, of coordination, of the ability to recognize the people she loved most. On one of my visits, when Sarah was 9 and Maggie was having more bad days than good ones, she asked me to take a walk with her in the garden behind their house. She was using a walker by then, moving slowly but determined to maintain what mobility she could. "I need to ask you something," she said, when we sat down on a bench surrounded by the roses Michael had planted for her. "Anything. When I can't take care of Sarah anymore, when this disease takes away everything that makes me who I am, I want you to be more involved in her life, not to replace Michael, but to be there as another person who loves her unconditionally. Of course, whatever you need. I also want you to tell her the truth, about who you are. She's going to need to know about the genetic component of Huntington's disease when she's old enough to make her own reproductive choices, and I want her to know that her biological father is a good man who would have been there from the beginning if he'd known about her. Maggie, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I made so many decisions based on fear, and most of them were wrong. I don't want Sarah to inherit that fear. I want her to know that love is worth fighting for, even when it's complicated, even when it's scary." I took her hand, being careful of the involuntary movements that had become more frequent. "She'll know. I promise you. She'll know how much you love her, and how much you loved me. Do you regret it? Any of it?" "No," I said, and I meant it. "I regret the time we lost. I regret the pain we caused each other, but I don't regret loving you. And I don't regret Sarah. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I didn't get to experience it the way I'd planned." Maggie died on a Tuesday morning in March, when Sarah was 12 years old. She'd been in hospice care for 3 months, and we'd all had time to say our goodbyes. Sarah was holding one hand, Michael was holding the other, and I was sitting in the corner of the room, watching the woman I'd loved for 15 years take her final breaths. The funeral was beautiful, a celebration of a life that had touched so many people, despite being cut short by disease. Sarah, remarkable in her strength, stood between Michael and me as we laid Maggie to rest, each of us holding one of her hands. Afterward, back at the house, Michael and I sat on the back porch while Sarah was inside with her grandparents, processing her grief in the way children do, with periods of intense sadness followed by moments of seemingly normal behavior. "She's going to need both of us," Michael said. "I know, and she's got both of us. I think it's time to tell her the truth, about you being her biological father." I nodded. Maggie asked me to tell her when she was ready. Are you ready? I thought about it. I've been Frank the family friend for 5 years. I don't know how to be anything else with her. You don't have to change anything. You just have to be honest about who you are. That evening, after the relatives had gone home and the house was quiet, the three of us sat in the living room where I'd first met Sarah all those years ago. She was curled up on the couch between Michael and me, still wearing her black dress from the funeral, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Sarah, Michael said gently, Frank and I want to tell you something about your family that you've never known. She looked up at me with those familiar green eyes. What kind of something? I took a deep breath. Sarah, do you remember when you were little and you asked about your biological father? You mean my birth daddy? Yes. Well, it turns out that your birth daddy has been in your life all along. It's me. She stared at me for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness of a child who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. You're my real daddy. Michael is your real daddy in every way that matters, I said carefully. He's the one who raised you and loved you and took care of you. But yes, I'm your biological father. Why didn't you tell me before? Michael and I exchanged glances. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that adults sometimes make decisions based on fear and pride and misguided attempts at protection? Your mom and I made some mistakes a long time ago, I said. We thought we were protecting you by keeping it a secret, but we were probably just protecting ourselves. Are you going to take me away from Daddy Michael? No, sweetheart. Never. Michael is your dad, and this is your home, and nothing about that is going to change. I just wanted you to know that you've got one more person in the world who loves you completely. She was quiet for a long time, and I could see her working through the implications of what we'd told her. Finally, she looked up at me and said, So you're like my bonus dad? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Yeah, I guess I am. Your bonus dad from Iowa. Cool. Can I still call you Frank? You can call me whatever feels right to you. She thought about it. I think I'll call you Frank Daddy. Is that okay? That's perfect. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were full of love and laughter and the kind of family bonds that transcend biology and traditional definitions. Sarah grew into a remarkable young woman, inheriting her mother's intelligence and compassion, Michael's steadiness and integrity, and maybe a little of my stubborn determination. She tested negative for the Huntington's gene when she turned 18, a gift that allowed her to plan for a future without the shadow of her mother's disease hanging over her. She went to college at the University of Washington, studying to become a pediatric nurse, inspired by her mother's work with children and her stepfather's career in medicine. Michael never remarried, though he dated occasionally. He said Sarah and I were enough family for him, and he seemed genuinely content with the life we'd all built together. He walked Sarah down the aisle when she married her college sweetheart, a good man named David, who reminded me a lot of Michael himself. I finally retired from the motorcycle shop when I turned 65, selling it to my longtime mechanic and using the money to travel, to write, to spend more time with the family that had become the center of my world. I moved to Seattle to be closer to Sarah and her children, my grandchildren, who call me Grandpa Frank and have no idea how complicated the path to their existence really was. And now, here I am, 35 years after I first met Margaret Rose Sullivan in that library in Cedar Rapids, telling you this story because I want you to understand something important about love and loss and the choices we make when we're scared. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it means letting go when you want to hold on. Sometimes it means fighting when you want to run away. Sometimes it means accepting that the person you love most in the world made decisions that hurt you and finding a way to forgive them anyway. Maggie was wrong about a lot of things, but she was right about one thing. Sometimes love means sacrificing your own happiness for someone else's well-being. The difference is, true love also means trusting the people you care about to make their own choices about what they can handle, what they're willing to sacrifice, what they think is worth fighting for. I spent 15 years being angry at Maggie for making decisions without me, for not trusting me enough to stay and fight. But looking back now, I understand that she was doing the best she could with impossible circumstances and limited information. We all were. The truth is, if she had stayed, if we had gotten married and raised Sarah together, it wouldn't have been the fairy tale romance I imagined. It would have been hard work, day after day, dealing with a progressive disease that stole pieces of the woman I loved until there wasn't much left of her to love. Maybe I would have been strong enough for that journey, and maybe I wouldn't have been. I'll never know. What I do know is that the path we did take, messy and painful as it was, led to something beautiful. Sarah got to grow up in a stable, loving home with a father who adored her. Michael got to experience the joy of raising a child and the deep satisfaction of caring for a woman who needed him. Maggie got to see her daughter thrive, even as her own health failed. And I got to know my child, to watch her grow into an amazing woman, to be part of her life in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. It wasn't the love story I'd planned, but it was the love story we got. And in the end, that had to be enough. Well, folks, that's my story. That's how a scared young man learned that love isn't about getting what you want. It's about wanting what's best for the people you care about, even when that's not what you planned. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, or if it just made you think about the choices you've made in your own life, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments. And for the love of all that's holy, please subscribe to this channel. I've got hundreds more stories to tell, and it would mean the world to this old man to know that someone out there is listening. Remember, 96% of you who watch these videos aren't subscribed yet, and that just breaks my heart a little bit. If you're getting something out of these stories, if they're making your day a little brighter, or helping you feel less alone in the world, then subscribe and be part of this community we're building together. Until next time, this is Frank Thompson, reminding you that every life has a story worth telling, and every story has the power to change someone's day for the better. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.